Log on, tune in, find out. Another good idea from Cambridge.
Well, we're very happy to welcome Philippa Taylor this morning, and with our apologies that the projector isn't working, so soon we'll have handouts to help you as Philippa talks to us. Philippa's a senior researcher on bioethics, marriage and the family for the Care Trust, which carries out research and some campaigning also for various ethical issues. And she's been working there as a consultant for 14 years. And she's also been the Associate Director at the Centre for Bioethics and Public Policy. And she's also, was just mentioning to me that she's working in a working group on family law for the Centre for Social Justice, which is a setup which gives advice to the Conservative Party as a sort of independent think tank. So Philippa's involved in a lot of active not only research but also political action as well in the area of ethics and bioethics. And so we're delighted, and also with our apologies for the lack of illustrations, but she's going to talk to us about bionic persons, the ethics of enhancing humans. So thank you very much.
Okay. And I had an email very recently from someone who circulated this email around to a number of us, and this is what he said. This is someone called Matt Brown. He said, "I think artificial intelligence programs are already in use in today's business. Brain chips are very likely to develop, but I expect huge resistance from society. Eventually we'll have robots capable of passing the Turing test, though not in 2018. Not by then. Eventually we might even be able to carry out mind uploading, for example, creating the copy of a human brain state inside a computer." So I got that just a few days ago, just when I was actually about to prepare this, which I thought was quite prescient. What I want to cover today, basically, is I want to look at where we are now at the moment, kind of the frontiers of science in technological issues. I want to look a bit about where we might be going, so beyond the frontiers of science. I want to look a bit at some of the ethical issues that are raised, and then I'm going to conclude by just touching on some religious perspectives. So that will be the kind of structure of my talk. So I'm going to firstly look at kind of where we are with technology. But before I do that, so I'm having to use the screen here to prompt me, which hopefully I'm going to have to try and get used to not having slides up on the screen. To enhance. Definition, which you'll get in your slides when you get them, to use technology and science to transcend what nature has endowed us. In other words, to make us better than well. And the BMA has recently produced a paper, which is available on the web, and I think I put it in extra in your reading, suggested reading, Boosting Your Brain Power, Ethical Aspects of Cognitive Enhancement. It's a really interesting paper, very helpful if anyone wants to think more about enhancement and technologies. They define enhancement as an increase in quality, power, or value. It can equally well apply to improving something that's deficient as to refining something that looks or works well. But in popular usage, the term has the connotation of improving upon nature and giving additional power or quality above that which is essential. So in other words, enhancement is generally seen as an extra benefit rather than a necessity. There's another very interesting book that, again, if anyone's interested in this was a book produced by Demos, which is a very well-known think tank. It came out a few years ago, and it was it kind of brought the whole issue of enhancement and biotechnology really into the public domain for the first time. This is called Better Humans, and what it has, I'm going to have some slide, so don't write this down. From smart pills to designer babies and extended lifespans, technology now promises to transform our very nature. On the back it says, "We all share a desire for self-improvement, whether through education, work, parenthood, or adhering to religious or ethical codes. Each of us seeks to become a better human in a variety of ways." So one way of enhancing ourselves. Now, what we need to think about is the progression that we're going to be seeing over the next few years. Over the last few years, currently and in the future, a variety of means have always been available to improve cognition by, for example, mental or physical exercise. Whenever people use pen and paper to remember something or use a calculator or computer to gain information, as healthy individuals, they're using, in effect, enhancers to improve their cognitive ability. Or perhaps they might improve their health by taking nutritional supplements. External enhancers such as books and computers aren't seen as potentially threatening at all, although they can exercise or influence a person's mindset in some way. They don't seem at all problematic or risky to us. But when do they become problematic and risky? And these are some of the questions. Sorry, you haven't got your slides. Okay, I've got on here. We all share a desire for self-improvement through, and I'll list some of the ways that you can see this progression: makeup, new clothes, education, work, exercise, coffee, Prozac, Ritalin, cosmetic surgery. Moving on to the next slide: cures for illnesses, ways to improve concentration and memory, implants for disabled people, bionic arms to replace limbs, methods to slow biological aging, targeting nanodrugs in the body, screening embryos for genetic disorders, boosting muscle strength for the elderly, using drugs to control behaviour of unruly children. These are all potential enhancement methods. Then we can move on. Radically extending lives, controlling and augmenting minds and memories, altering and designing genetic makeup of children, remaking humans through mixing man and machine, upgrading humans through direct connections to computers, re-engineering and changing human nature. So at what point do these issues, where do the problems and the risks lie? Is it when they alter the chemical balance and the functioning of the brain? Is it when they involve major surgery? This is the big question: is what is biotechnology being used for, and what should it be used for? And I think the key issues here is biotechnology to be used for disease prevention and restoring health, or can it be used to enhance and improve ourselves? Where do we draw the line? How do we draw the line? On what basis do we draw the line? And that's kind of one of the main questions I think we're going to have to face, and this is the kind of question you'll need to think about as we're going through the talk, and I'll come back to it towards the end as well. And to take an example of, hopefully the slides will come soon, cosmetic surgery is what I've got up on the screen. And cosmetic surgery is a great illustration of how easy it is to move from something that is potentially a treatment to something that's an enhancement, and how hard it is to stop that progression, and how hard it is to draw any lines or even some control. I got an email that was circulated again by someone from a doctor, Dr. Chatterjee, who's an associate professor of neurology at the University of Pennsylvania. He foresaw this debate in a 2004 paper. He argues that the history of cosmetic surgery, scorned initially as vain and unnatural, but now mainstream, is now seen as a form of self-improvement. And he sees this as a guide to predicting the trajectory of cosmetic neurology, as he calls it. And he basically says that society worships at the altar of progress and to the demigod of choice. Both are very strong undercurrents in the culture and illustrate why we're making this transition. And the slide I have up here is basically, it just says, what price the perfect smile? From next to nothing 10 years ago, we will spend now 360 million on cosmetic dentistry in 2006. Our correspondent, this is a quote from the Time, who has had her teeth whitened 3 times, explains why a gleaming mouth is worth the expense. Just simply a little illustration of the kind of money that's being spent on cosmetic surgery. And I have another quote from Better Humans, from a booklet that I wrote a year ago. A decade ago, cosmetic surgery was regarded as risky, physically risky, morally dubious, prohibitively expensive, and socially unacceptable. It has now been rebranded as something so innocuous and sensible as to be, in effect, mundane. A survey for Grazia magazine found that over half of women expect to have cosmetic surgery of some sort. Bupa suggests that there's around 75,000 operations, or £250 million worth of operations in Britain alone, on non-surgical procedures, excluding non-surgical procedures such as Botox. So this illustrates really very well how techniques that were originally developed to treat injuries or disfigurements can and do become popular and very socially acceptable for enhancement and not just treatment purposes, despite warnings, as I'm sure you all know, of real safety concerns with the use of some cosmetic surgery. And my next quote that is on the screen, again, comes from Better Humans. I shall read it out to you. It says, from this book basically says, what is the difference, this is difference for people, what is the difference between highlighting your hair and having a facelift? As surgery gets safer and cheaper, women struggle to see how the latter could be bad if the former is good. The latter being highlighting your hair, and the former being having a facelift. And it's just that division and the border is becoming harder and harder to define. This book goes on to say, and this is where I'm going to start moving on again, this is part of my introduction, Better Humans, a new set of possibilities is opening up. Advances in biotechnology, neuroscience, computing and nanotechnology mean that we're in the early stages of a period of huge technological potential. Within the next 30 years, it may become commonplace to alter the genetic makeup of our children, this is what John was talking about yesterday, to insert artificial implants into our bodies and to radically extend life expectancy. Now, how is this going to happen? What are the advances that are going to make this possible? Well, there's various, and I shall concentrate on a few of them. I've listed on the slide pharmaceutical products, so I shall mention those in a short while. Genetics, I shall touch on that, but John was really talking about that yesterday as well. Neuroscience, nanotechnology, and computing and information technology. These are the different enablers. Just briefly, on that list, nanotechnology is the kind of underlying enabler of a lot of these technologies. It's underpinning a lot of the breakthroughs that we're going to be seeing in manufacturing and synthetic reproduction and healthcare and biotechnology. So that's the kind of underpinning technology. What it's going to do is basically create more capable systems and artifacts that are much smaller, lighter, cheaper, less energy hungry. And there's a huge investment in nanotechnology. Already a lot of materials out in the market based on nanotechnology, and a lot more in the pipeline, and there'll be a lot more in the future. And this is where you hear about things like nanobots, which are sort of little robots and things in the bloodstream that can deliver targeted drug release. So basically, I'm not going to mention nanotechnology again, but that really is that's really going to enable a lot of the technological advances that I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to quickly look at pharmaceutical products, and then I'm going to look at genetics and age radically extending life expectancy, and then I'm going to talk a bit more about cybernetics and spend a bit more time on that. But firstly, mind pills, which is very much the focus of this BMA paper. And this is something that we're really going to see a lot more use in this country and in the Western world, and it's going to raise quite a number of ethical issues. So basically, a number of pharmaceutical products have emerged which improve cognition or concentration, memory, and other aspects of cognitive performance, in effect, sort of intelligence. And I have a picture on the screen of Ritalin, which was one of the drugs that is being developed. Another drug is something called modafinil. And they were all originally developed to remedy specific cognitive impairments. So, for instance, Ritalin was developed to remedy things like ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and modafinil to treat narcolepsy, which is a sleep disorder. So excessive daytime sleepiness is called. Now, these were developed to treat people who have problems, but because they alter the chemical balance of neurotransmitters in the brain, they also have the potential to improve cognition in healthy people. Studies have led to growing evidence that in addition to their intended uses, these drugs can have beneficial effects on some aspects of cognitive functioning in healthy individuals. In other words, they can make people better than well. And I have on the screen, which hopefully you'll get in your paper, your slides at some point, a couple of quotes, one of which is particularly interesting. In 2006, I've got the wrong date on here, but I've just noticed, Sunday Times had an article, and it said, the headline was, and I've got this on the screen, "Number 10 scientist urges brain pills for all." And basically, this is why this is not to be dismissed lightly. The chief scientist, I think it was, he told a group at Number 10, a cabinet meeting, he said last year, that actually smart drugs make people think faster, improve memory, reduce tiredness. They'll be commonplace within 20 years. And he urges brain pills for all. That's the headline that it said, according to the government's chief scientific advisor. BBC News, about 4 months ago, said, this is the headline, "A future where your brain is better. The theory is this: if people are already willing to undergo the risks of plastic surgery in search of the perfect body, who is to suggest they would not do the same to better their brains?" So we can't dismiss it. It is something that has been talked about at the highest levels. The BMA has done a big paper on it, and there have been a number of newspaper articles. And there is a lot of research going on to this, because as our understanding of the way that the brain functions in relation to cognition, as our understanding of that improves, it's likely that more drugs with fewer side effects will be developed, and that such demand, as I've hinted at in the paper, will increase. The BMA talks about a study, and this is just to prove that these drugs work. There's some debate a bit about how much they work, but the BMA quoted one study of 60 healthy young adult male volunteers. They received either a placebo or modafinil prior to performing a number of tests designed to assess memory and attention. In this study, modafinil slowed response time, but led to greater accuracy of results, suggesting that the drug caused the individuals to carefully evaluate the problem before initiating a response, thus improving overall performance. Those who had taken the drug also reported feeling more alert, attentive and energetic. A recent commentary in Nature Journal, in a commentary, 2 Cambridge University researchers reported that about a dozen of their colleagues had admitted to regular use of prescription drugs like Provigil and modafinil, which promote wakefulness, in order to improve their academic performance. I have a great quote on the computer that's going to go up. I found this a year or so ago. I'll read it out to you. Through some pharmaceutical products. So this is quite a long quote, but it's worth listening to. This is someone called Catherine Malone, who's a George Washington University junior. She says, "I'm a varsity athlete in crew." She's a sports person. "So we're pretty careful about what we put in our bodies. So among my personal friends, I'd say the use," this is talking about pharmaceutical products, "I'd say the use is only 50 or 60%. Seen by some ambitious students as maybe their ticket to Harvard Law, these brain steroids can be purchased on many campuses for as little as $3 to $5 per pill. These drugs represent only the first primitive halting generation of cognitive enhancers. Memory drugs will soon make it to the market if human clinical trials continue successfully." She's George Washington. She's basically saying that 50 or 60% of her fellow students use these kind of drugs, which I think is a huge number, and they're incredibly easily and cheaply available. Okay. I have also heard a talk by someone else from Cambridge University talking about these issues, and she was talking specifically about modafinil, and she was really talking about how much more widely spread and increasingly modafinil is being used by office workers as well as students, and some of the issues that it raises. So it is very much an issue for today. I'm going to just quickly mention genetics. The BMA in that paper states that intelligence is one of a number of behavioural traits for which there is some evidence to show a high level of heredity. So the suggestion of our high genetic contribution to intelligence has caused speculation about the possibility of genetic selection and manipulation as a form of enhancement, cognitive enhancement. The BMA says, if we knew which genes were associated with intelligence, then it has been suggested that it might be possible to use the same technology to select embryos that are of above average intelligence. So I have on the screen a picture of genetics and different ways it could be used. I'll just give you a quote from one. Stephen Pincock, scientist at Daily News, 2006, says, boosting of oxygen, now I'm talking about enhancement, sorry, it shows on the slides very clearly where I'm going in terms of the subject, so I'm talking here about enhancement through genetics. Boosting of oxygen transfer and muscle mass building are definitely two of the key areas of gene doping, as indicated by the abuse of pharmaceutical drugs today by some athletes for those purposes. I've just included that for two reasons, partly because of the importance of the way that genes will be used in terms of gene doping, genetic engineering, genetic enhancement. They will be used to do enhancement. But I've also used that quote to show that actually sport is probably going to... Sport and the military are probably two of the key areas which will be the drivers for genetic and other types of enhancement. There was a guy, where's my paper, who, Jeffrey Goldspink at UCL, he'd been doing some work himself in genetic therapies. And so if I can find the quote that he's... performance-enhancing substances are rife already in professional sport. As the field of gene therapy progresses with its promise to become a widely available therapy, so too does the potential for misuse by athletes. Athletes are most likely to use genetic technologies that offer them the same kind of benefits as banned drugs. Jeffrey Goldspink is one researcher whose work on gene therapy for muscle mass has already brought him extra attention from the sporting world. He is developing a treatment for muscle wasting diseases, and in mouse studies, he was able to trigger a 30% increase in muscle mass within weeks, suggesting the treatment could be more potent than anabolic steroids. He says that people from what he calls the sports counterculture who want him to supply them with his technology frequently contact him. And he acknowledges that it's not rocket science to make genes. Many graduates in biochemistry can make them if they're experienced enough. So sports could be one of the drivers for using these genetics as more than just treatment. I've got, and sport actually means that we shouldn't underestimate the attraction of changing the bodies using genetic therapy. At the moment, there are not only technological but also serious safety barriers that are likely to hinder, for the present, the use of genetic manipulation and or selection as a form of cognitive enhancement in the immediate future. So we're not immediately going to see this, but opinions differ about the likelihood of these technological barriers being overcome in the future. And I have two pictures, two slides of front covers on the screen. One by Gregory Stock, who John mentioned yesterday, another one by Lee Silver. And I've put them up simply because the titles of the books state the warnings clearly ahead. Gregory Stock's title of his book, Redesigning Humans, Our Inevitable Genetic Future. Lee Silver's book says Remaking Eden, How Genetic Engineering and Cloning Will Transform the American Family. And it says the use of reprogenetic technologies is inevitable. For better and worse, a new age is upon us. James Watson, he says, in terms of genetics, no one really has the guts to say it, but if we could make better humans, have better human beings by knowing how to add genes, why shouldn't we? Okay, just briefly mention of a slide up here saying this is talking about enhancement through radical life extension. And some of you may well know someone called Aubrey de Grey. I think he's in Cambridge actually. He's a bit of a maverick in many ways, but he's an advocate of radically extending life. And although he is very extreme, what he's doing is trying to bring into the mainstream and popular culture some of his ideas and theories, and he's getting a lot of popular press and he's getting a lot of hearing, despite being a maverick and overly radical. And he basically, his theory is that aging is a disease and it's not natural, which is why we should see preventing and pushing death back in every way possible as something that is a treatment, not an enhancement. He says it's a disease. He says if we could stop 100,000 people dying needlessly every day, why wouldn't we? I mean, he's extreme. He does say things like he believes someone who is 60 now will live to 1,000 years, which obviously is not going to happen. But what he's trying to say is actually there are ways that we can try and halt, and that we should try and halt the aging and death process. And he says we need to do it. He says it's a good investment to try and try and radically extend our lives. Unfortunately, someone like Aubrey de Grey is called out regularly at big conferences over the world to state his views, and he always gets a platform because he's so radical. But there is someone else as well, the Times, I can't remember the author of this, I haven't got the full quote up on here, but the headline in an article, a commentary, an editorial, I think in the Times in 2006 says, this is the headline, anyone for tennis at the age of 150. And again, someone here also advocating extending, using every possible technological means, extending life. Right, cybernetics, enhancement through cybernetics. Cybernetics is the integration of the human and of mechanical, melding of man and machine. I have a nice picture up on the screen for you of that, so look into the melding of man and machine. A couple of quotes I've got on here to introduce it. Sense of the Guardian, just a couple of months ago, article, Sense of Touch Restored for Woman with a Bionic Arm. The Blade Runner generation, Sunday Times, just last year, the end of last year, They did a big article in the Sunday Times magazine, actually, called The Blade Runner Generation, and it was very interesting, lots of interesting quotes, one of which was, "What started as a quest to help the disabled will revolutionise the lives of the able-bodied. Even Bill Gates agrees, robotics is the next giant leap for mankind." Basically, there's a steady development of connections between machines and human beings. And the word cyborg, which has for many years been kept within the domain of science fiction, is describing clearly the results of connections. A cyborg is a cybernetic organism. It's very much an issue for now and the future. Professor Rodney Brooks, Massachusetts MIT, he says, "As a species, we're starting to put our information processing technology inside our bodies. We're becoming a little more robotic. At the same time, our technologies are becoming more biological. Over the next 50 years, we'll see robots with more biological components and people with more electronic components." Already, I saw this a couple of months ago in the Telegraph, this article. A microscopic robot, small enough to travel through blood vessels, has been built by scientists. Less than a millimetre in size, the robot walks like a crab on 6 legs and has been designed to clear blocked arteries. It was produced by researchers at a university in Korea, who found the robot was able to travel 55 yards in a week. And the idea is once inside a blocked artery, it's able to release drugs to dissolve blood clots, which are often the cause of heart attacks. And the title is Micro Robot That Can Clear Arteries. Those two quotes just simply show the two different sides to the coin, one of which is very much an enhancement issue, and one of which, those microscopic robots, are very much a treatment issue. I have on the screen here, which you'll be able to see when you get your slides, if they ever come, wearable computing. Now I want to just show the progression of use of cybernetic technology now and where we're heading. Wearable computers, it doesn't really help by having the pictures up here, but I do have some pictures of it. Basically, there's no surgery involved in wearable computers, no risks involved in having wearable computing or technological sort of parts on your body. It just enables connectivity for people, so they can have instant connection to either a portable computer or to the internet. There is a small market for it, not a huge market, and I have a quote here from someone called Steve, an Australian. He says, "The wearable computer," this is why he wants it, he says, "The wearable computer allows me to explore my humanity, alter my consciousness, shift my perspectives so that I can choose to see the world in very different, often liberating ways." Another very non-invasive way that's being developed to directly stimulate the brain is something that I've got in here, a brain-computer, a mind balance game, it's called. This is brain-computer interaction, which is not just for therapeutic use, it's used for pleasure and fun. This mind balance game was our first stab at creating a brain-computer interface controlled environment. And the title says Brainwaves Control Video Game. That was BBC News Online. That was in 2004, so that was quite a few years ago. So brain-computer interaction is not always risky, it's not invasive, and it's not just for therapeutic use. But I've got some slides. And there's quite a little point. I'm going to move on to deep brain stimulation in just a minute, but if I just wait for the slides to come before I...
hope it's not fart.
Deep brain stimulation is an invasive procedure, talked about very non-invasive procedure. It involves the insertion of electrodes into the brain through the skull, directed at an appropriate part of the brain. The connection is run under the patient's skin to an electrical pulse generator, which is implanted under the skin on the chest, a bit like a pacemaker. The pulse generator sends tiny electrical currents through the electrode to the brain. So basically it's a brain implant. Now there are small risks obviously associated with the procedure, and a very small number of patients, the operation to insert the electrode has resulted in a stroke. Some of this I've got from the BMA paper, and this is the source of, the slides aren't all from the BMA paper, but the source of what I've just read to you now is from the BMA paper, just to show the validity of what I'm saying. And this is again what this, partly what the BMA is saying. The beneficial effects have been shown to last up to 8 years, but longer term effects are unknown. Deep brain stimulation is now a proven therapeutic procedure for some patients with Parkinson's. Okay. I've got a quote from Kevin Warwick, who I'll come back to and talk a bit about later. But but he's done some work in this area. He says, at the moment there's an implant that can be pushed right into the middle of the brain, and it provides a stimulation that counteracts the tremor effects of Parkinson's disease to the extent that many patients can lead a normal life. So they can leave the implant switched on all the time. The number of people benefiting from that is now increasing. The surgeons are getting very good and deciding which people can benefit from it, the exact frequency of stimulation and the positioning of the implant. There is now research into the long-term effects of this therapy. And I heard Kevin Moore talk at a conference a couple of years ago, and the first part of the talk he was talking about this technology he's done, and that he's really been very involved in to develop brain implants to help those with Parkinson's, and he works with a hospital in this country, a research institute, to do this. There is similar research into neural implants to help with epilepsy, which is also looking at positive. And there are all sorts of possibilities for the application of this sort of implant. It's being used, and this is again from the BMA, being used experimentally to treat central neuropathic pain, such as phantom limb pain, depression, anxiety disorders, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. And developments have recently been reported in the use of deep brain stimulation to develop levels of awareness in patients in a minimally conscious state. There's also been speculation, not surprisingly, that it could be used as a cognitive enhancer, with deep brain stimulation referred to as plastic surgery of the mind, or kind of a brain lift. A quote from BBC News, this is in January. Research carried out by doctors in Canada suggests that electrical stimulation of areas deep within the brain could boost memory. Professor Lozano is now leading a pilot study into whether deep brain stimulation can help people with early Alzheimer's disease. They're initially testing 6 patients. Now, because of obviously a highly invasive procedure, risky, no projects therefore involving healthy volunteers. All this work at the moment is done with those with severe disorders and disabilities. Nevertheless, studies involving rats have shown some improvements as healthy rats in attention and memory following deep brain stimulation. Now, the success achieved so far in patients with Parkinson's and depression has, in effect, demonstrated that stimulating specific regions of the brain can affect directly behaviour. And therefore, because it affects performance, improvement in attention or memory, whatever, it's attracting interest from healthy people to enhance and improve their own performance and abilities. And at this point, I'll come back to the slides I mentioned right at the beginning about cosmetic surgery. And I think the increasing use that we have of sometimes major cosmetic surgery today to enhance physical appearance should warn us that the surgery involved in this kind of technology, were it to be technically possible, will not put everyone, well obviously it will put a lot of people off, like not everyone wants to do cosmetic surgery, but it won't put everyone off, it won't put people off major surgery. The next slide, just about see, if you turn over the page, a rat there, it doesn't really, doesn't come out very clearly, but there's been interest in the possible use of brain-machine interfaces by DARPA, that's the US Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, does all the military sort of advanced research in the US. It's reported to have invested a significant proportion of its research budget into this area. The drivers being, as I said earlier, sports and military. So the military are very much at the forefront of a lot of this research. One of their areas of research involved implanting electrodes into the brains of 5 rats. Using signals sent directly to the brain via these electrodes, the researchers were able to train the rats to move right or left, to climb and to jump. In other studies, you can't see it very clearly if you move on to the next slide, the second slide on that page, rats and monkeys have been taught how to control a lever via electrodes implanted in the brain. And it is recognised that anything that can be done, almost anything that can be done to a rat, could potentially be done to a human. Therefore, if it's possible for a remote-controlled rat to be created, can it then be possible for a remote-controlled human? That's one of the questions that this raises. The third slide along there, you can just about see the heading, Unlocking a Mind. Advances in the use of technology have been reported that aim to assist paralysed patients who cannot communicate. And what, again, they've been able to do is find methods using implants to detect neural signals, translate those neural signals from a person's brain into command signals that can control physical devices such as robotic limbs or a cursor on a screen. which could restore physical movement to paralysed body parts, or could enable someone who is paralysed with a locked-in syndrome of some sort to communicate using the cursor, who's someone who just can't use their arms. And that's what that picture is illustrating. A team from Emory University in Atlanta have implanted a transmitting device into the brain of a stroke patient. Once the motor neurons were linked to silicon, the patient was able to move a cursor on a computer screen just by thinking about it. These developments have led to speculation that in the long term, brain-to-brain communication could be possible, and this technology could be used to improve the performance of healthy individuals, not just those with locked-in or paralysis. The Sunday Times quote you can see on that slide there. Scientists have demonstrated that human thoughts can be converted into radio waves and used by paralysed people to create movement. The creation of cyborgs, part human, part machine, is becoming a reality. Okay, I mean, obviously there are lots of significant and serious technological barriers and safety issues to overcome still. So I mean, as you can see in this part of the talk, we're looking ahead rather than current. But we're looking at what's happening in research at the frontiers of science, in effect. I've got a picture of this girl here. This is perhaps why this is attracting attention, potential uses in the future. What if, instead of sending electrical signals from our nerves and into machinery, we could send information the other way, directly into our brains? And what this picture is showing is someone who's, in effect, I mean, this is a hypothetical situation, someone's got a brain implant, and they're greeting someone, and up on their screen in front of them they can see, or uploaded into their brain, they can see this girl called Kate Mann, and immediately they know where they met her, who she is, and a bit of information about her. So it's kind of identity confirmed, it says on the screen there in the bottom corner. Kevin Warwick, I'll come back to him. This is where I did have a film clip from Kevin Warwick. Kevin Warwick is a professor of cybernetics at Reading University. Not quite such a maverick as Aubrey de Grey, but again, someone who's very much a radical, the outer edges of some of this work. He's again a bit of a media person and gets a lot of publicity. He's done a lot of really good work. I've heard him a couple of times at talks, and his work with Parkinson's and other stuff is very good. But he's very much at the forefront of pushing the frontiers of science and the boundaries of this work. And he's what we would certainly call a transhumanist, which I'll come back to later. His radical views are, and this is a quote from him, 2007, "Making the final link to go all the way to someone else's brain is extremely complex, but it's nearly there. I see it as being achievable in my lifetime, and I want to do it. Linking a human brain to the internet means you can extend the nervous system as far as the internet takes it, so the body is no longer limited to one place," he enthuses. Warwick has already used his implant to control a robot arm from New York. There was an interesting article from a paper called Strategic Trends, and this was produced, I think, by the MOD. I've got the reference in my own paper. And they were basically predicting, for the purposes of the military, where they saw developments in 2035. And one of the things that this Strategic Trends, so this is a government-funded paper, one of the things it says here, by 2035, an implantable information chip could be developed and wired directly to the user's brain. Information and entertainment choices would be accessible through cognition and might include synthetic sensory perception beamed direct to the user's senses. Wider related ICT developments might include the invention of synthetic telepathy, including mind-to-mind or telepathic dialogue. This kind of development would have obvious military and security, as well as control, legal and ethical implications. So again, this is something that the MOD is aware of, that may well be on the horizon and not far off, potentially not far off at all. Just 2 slides there I've got from Wired, I can see. German scientists have recently developed chips that sit in the retina and convert light into electrical signals that are sent to the brain and help restore sight. The Biocenter has on its website, they do quite a lot of work in this, Centre for Bioethics and Public Policy. Even eyesight could be corrected by way of nanotechnology and nanorobotics. An electronic rubber band placed around the eye to adjust the eye when needed by way of a switch on the side of the head, in much the same way as spectacles are worn currently. This technology is currently being tested and developed. Warwick does warn a little bit. He says, with vision it's more difficult. The optic nerve is an extremely complex thing, much more so than the auditory nerve, but I do believe we will see enormous developments in the future. So in seeing. And here I have on the picture on the screen, it doesn't come up very clearly on your slide, so it's the bottom left-hand slide. I've got a picture of lots of little squares in there. That is basically a slide showing what researchers did is they were able to put in an implant behind the back of the optic nerve of a cat, and they were able to transmit the images that the cat was seeing onto a computer screen. So those pictures there is what the researchers are able to see that the cat is seeing. So in effect, they're looking through the eyes of a cat. That's what those pictures are, which I think is phenomenal kind of stuff that's happening, and again has a lot of potential implications for other uses and abuses in the future. So that's some of the stuff that's going on. Here's some comments on the stuff that's going on and happening. Ray Kurzweil, I don't think I've got like the book, but you've got a picture on the screen there. Another transhumanist and radical, a futurist, he calls himself. The age of neural implants is underway, albeit at an early stage. Directly enhancing the information processing of our brain with synthetic circuits is focusing, this is important, at first on correcting the glaring defects caused by neurological and sensory diseases and disabilities. That first paragraph that's where we are now, correcting defects. But ultimately, this is the second paragraph, we will all find the benefits of extending our abilities through neural implants, difficult to resist. So that's the progression. His quote in Better Humans, this Demos think tank. Demos is an extremely well-respected and well-known think tank in this country. When I went to the launch of this book, there were hundreds of people there, including various journalists and media people. This gets a lot of therefore lots of publicity. It's written. The chapters in this are written by a whole load of different well-respected, fairly well-respected, most of them, authors and scientists. It certainly had a lot of publicity from it. He wrote in this, Ray Kurzweil wrote in it, we didn't stay on the ground, we didn't stay on the planet, we're not staying within the limits of our biology. We're a species that instinctively seeks to go beyond our limitations. This isn't Joel Garrow. He's written this book, Radical Evolution, The Promise and Peril of Enhancing Our Minds, Our Bodies, and What It Means to Be Human. He's a New York Times journalist. He got a lot of publicity from that book. He says, this isn't fiction. You can see you can see why I'm trying to say this, because some of this sounds a bit like fiction and radical, but he says, this isn't fiction. You can see the outlines of this reality in the headlines now. You're going to see a lot more of it in the next few years, certainly within your prospective lifetimes. And Wired, I've got the picture of Kevin Warwick up there. Cybernetics pioneer Kevin Warwick is upgrading the human body, starting with himself. He calls himself iRobot. His quote here, at present our method of communication, speech, is very slow and error-prone. The potential to communicate by means of thought signals is very exciting. Speech is an old-fashioned, outdated means of communication. And at this point I wanted to bring in this clip from the farm, because he believes it's so outdated that what he's trying to do, he's done a whole load of, he's done implant experimentation, and because it's quite radical and invasive and risky, he's done it on himself and his wife. And he and his wife have managed to connect up and have implants into their bodies and effectively communicate sort of senses to each other. But the film clip I've shown, I would have shown, he's basically, and this was shown on the farm, which I think is Channel 4 fairly recently, he put an implant, surgically implanted in his arm, and you see him on the film clip, and he can basically, by opening and closing his palm, he can control, and you can hear it, control an alarm in the building, and then he turns on and off a light switch with this. Now clearly not much use necessarily in that, but what he then does, he then goes and sits in a wheelchair outside, and he uses the same technology with this implant, and he controls the wheelchair. So he's able to turn this wheelchair around and about, and he's able to stop it and start it. And now that, you can see, instantly would be really useful for those who've got paralysis and who are completely reliant on other people to give them a certain amount of independence, and the potential of what that could be used for in the future. What he then does is he's in a studio, he then communicates using that kind of movement with his arm there, links up to the internet, and is able to control an arm, a robot arm, the other side of the world. So he went to New York and did it, and he was able to control a robot arm in Reading using the opening and closing of his arm. So he basically, on that one clip, is showing some therapeutic and some non-therapeutic uses of implant technology. Susan Greenfield, Tomorrow's People, I think I've got a book, which I would have had because I've got a picture of that, I think. She says, is human nature about to change forever? And this moves us on to the next part, really, because human nature is one of the big issues, and the changing of it and the potential of what we're doing to humans. That's one of the big issues that these kind of technologies raise. So, and Susan Greenfield, I'm sure you all know, is a professor of, you can tell me, she's the Royal Institute Director of the Royal Institution. Yeah. So highly respected. What issues does it raise? You can see the slide there now. Francis Collins. If we have the ability to heal, if genetic research holds out hope and promise, if it can benefit individuals with whom we have nothing to offer otherwise, and not harm others in the process, then we have to do it. But we have to shoulder the responsibility of making sure it is used for good purposes and not for unethical ones. I think that's quite a useful quote to start with, and the good balance there. Supporters of enhancement technologies point to the fact that since such improvement is one of the aims of education, for instance in tutoring and all the other things I listed at the beginning, achieving the same aim of enhancement by means of drugs or genetics or other technologies should be seen as equally acceptable. Aspiring constantly to improve or reinvent ourselves and provide a better world for our children are among the enduring facets of each generation. Our desire to improve ourselves is an aspect of our shared humanity. Is the use of artificial cognitive enhancement or technology simply a distinction without a moral difference? John Harris, a bioethicist at Manchester University, makes the point that if it wasn't good for you, it wouldn't be enhancement. And arguing in terms of human functioning, an enhancement is by definition an improvement on what went before. Now, there are a number of issues that are raised, and I haven't got time to go through them all. I'm afraid your slide is quite small. You're not going to be able to read that at all, actually. Some ethical issues. Anyway.
I realise it's coming out quite like that.
That's all right. That's great. Thank you. Safety issues and side effects and unintended consequences. The effect of taking drugs over a long period of time, particularly the effect on the developing brain, especially for younger people, are still being assessed. When an individual suffers from some illness or disability, the benefit of treating the condition, so if you have an illness, the benefit of treating that offsets the possible harms and some of the side effects. But if a drug is being used by an otherwise healthy individual to improve on normal functioning, the balance is obviously different there. But despite the warnings and the risks of side effects, 79% of American college students who reported taking Ritalin in one study had no concerns about their use. That's the BMA again. So basically the BMA is making the point that despite that fact that there are serious side effects and concerns and no long-term studies on the use, college students don't care. What may appear superficially to be an unalloyed benefit may hold hidden disadvantages. So there are issues like potentially addiction, side effects, less monitoring of these drugs that aren't regulated, especially when they're obtained off the internet, misuse, exaggerated claims for benefits, again they're not regulated properly, the underplaying of adverse effects, perhaps unrealistic expectations. It may become not just addiction, it may become be a problem that people, once they start taking it, have to keep taking the drugs to maintain a certain level of performance. Those are some of the issues that are raised. Another interesting issue is though people are likely to see a good memory as a benefit, in fact our brains selectively filter out some information and memories, particularly those that are trivial or traumatic. And we don't know whether drugs that enhance memory will impair that important function. So there may almost be a risk of kind of over-enhancement, or oversupply of memory could overload the memory system. So ironically, our ability to perform complex cognitive tasks could be impaired by remembering all the trivial details of an exercise or whatever, an operation of what's going on. So although there'll always be uncertainty about long-term use, that's probably no different from the use of cosmetic surgery today, which again is a subject of controversy, but is in common use. And I think it would be naive and short-sighted to assume that we can dismiss the demand for cognitive enhancement on the grounds of safety. And we should anticipate in time, in the not too distant future probably, where such interventions are not only available, but become increasingly safe. I mean, the companies that are developing this are working hard to improve safety and lower the risks. I'm having to, I can't touch on all the ethical issues. I'm just going to raise questions here and some of the issues, not all of them. But access and justice, which is my second point there, you can just about read access and justice. What I've written under there, we won't be able to read it, who will or should have access to these technologies? What should be the priorities in research? How or should we regulate? Some people would say there should be access because an overall increase in cognitive ability in society would lead to competitive advantages and the cut-and-thrust world of international trade and commerce. Should some people, we put our lives in the hands of some professionals, for example, airline pilots and doctors. We're all at the risk of them making human errors. Occasional reports of mistakes by exhausted workers after long shifts remind us of the fallibility of human nature. The use of cognitive enhancement or mind pills or stimulants to reduce this possibility by promoting wakefulness and improving concentration may have wide-ranging benefits, including, for example, the saving of lives. And the US military personnel reportedly use modafinil quite frequently to maintain alertness. Inequalities is an obvious problem. Is it that those who already have will increasingly have these technologies, because some of these technologies are not only available only in the West, but they're only affordable to those who have the money to pay for it. It could be argued that the more use of technologies that there are can actually filter down to benefit everyone as they get cheaper and more commonplace. But the opposite could be true. It could be that the use of these technologies will increase inequality, because they'll only be available to those who are willing and able to pay and or experiment. So in one way, it could reinforce a competitive and individualistic culture, where the focus is on the individual and competitive advantage. But also, there are big issues about distributive justice. For instance, those in the third world, how are we spending resources if half the world is still hungry and hasn't got clean water? Should we be investing work in this? Investing research into this area and availability of this to just a few in the world. Regulation, I have a question. Should we regulate? And if so, if the answer to that is, the gut feeling is yes, we should regulate, but how? Cosmetic surgery, again, is an example of where people are willing to take medical risks for the sake of enhancement, because the benefits for improving their appearance outweigh risks of harm to them. Now, many in society may worry about these kind of trends, but if people are choosing to make such interventions, if they have sufficient and accurate information and are competent to make a decision, at the moment they're not prevented from doing so with cosmetic surgery. But at the same time, so although there is freedom to use cosmetic surgery and sometimes very risky stuff, society is still trying to limit a bit the risks by setting some standards and regulation, licensing practitioners, forbidding certain products and treatments. So there is a certain amount of regulation in that, but a lot of autonomy is still given to individuals in this country particularly. Do we use the same for cognitive and mechanical enhancements? Society has several options in providing access to enhancement techniques. There's 3 different ways that we can regulate. Firstly, we could just prohibit all these technologies for everyone in all circumstances. But we already have unfair distribution of resources. For instance, heart operations, computers, the use of personal tuition, they all provide competitive advantage and unfair advantage in any way, in some ways, but we don't prevent their use. And perhaps with the use of cognitive enhancers, for instance, mind pills, are we too late anyway? It's already in use. People can access these technologies already on the internet. Those who can afford to use these technologies, cybernetic implants, whatever, will if they can afford to. So what do? Perhaps we make them equally accessible to everyone who wants them by subsidising those who can't afford them. Or do we limit and regulate the situations in which they could be used? But again, by trying to limit and regulation, we still have problems with the use of the internet and the fact that some people can afford these and others can't. And if we do start regulating, do we treat the different technologies differently? And in which case, if you do try to treat them differently and say that they have different effects, different outcomes, different risks, different long-term effects, on what basis? And what if they have different moral issues that are raised? What if there are different physical risks? There's lots of different problems with the issue of regulation, but nevertheless, I believe it is important that we do regulate. Pressure and coercion is the third one I put down. What might begin as an individual decision, or a personal autonomous decision, can quickly become expected and demanded of people. If the US military start to use some of these technologies, other armed forces, for instance, are under pressure too. If you look at the next slide, pressure and coercion, that's an example of prenatal testing, how once something becomes an exception, it becomes routine, and then there becomes pressure almost for parents to use it. Just simply an illustration of the movement from exception to requirement. But more important is the next quote that I've got, the fears over drugs that can boost your brain. These are two quotes from the Daily Mail last year, and simply a bit of research on mind pills, and this is gut reaction from people in the population when they were talked about the possible effects of mind pills. And the gut reaction was very good. It says one respondent wondered if she would be putting her children at a disadvantage if she did not give them access to such drugs. Another expressed concern that workers would have to take the drugs to keep up with colleagues. So basically a very simple illustration of once something becomes available, then there will be pressure on others to use it. So in other words, just to keep up. And that you can see illustrated in sports for those who are under pressure to use drugs, sometimes just to stay in the game rather than even maintain a competitive advantage. Enhanced professionals is my next slide. Should patients have the right to expect a doctor to use memory-enhancing drugs to keep abreast of the medical literature and understand what the person's problem is? Should pastors be expected to take drugs that enhance their skills to listen, to be socially restrained or passionate with pulpit, to be non-judgmental? Slightly facetious, but should we enhance should we enhance the sight and stamina of soldiers or of pilots? Just some potential issues. Treatment enhancement is the next issue. The problem with treatment, the movement from treatment to enhancement, is there are no very clear boundaries here. A judgment is often made in the eye of the beholder. There are two extremes. On one hand, it's very clear often to see what is a treatment. On the other hand, sometimes it's very easy to see what is an enhancement. There's a big grey area in the middle where it's not clear, and something that is a treatment for one person could be an enhancement for something else. So the same technology could be used for different purposes for different people, and it's not always clear. So an intervention in an older patient to prevent or delay onset for mild cognitive impairment. If the impairment is mild, doesn't seriously impact their life, it seems to be neither therapy nor enhancement. Nevertheless, although boundaries are not always clear-cut, it is possible to draw some guidelines. And the BMA says therapy is an intervention to counteract a known or anticipated health deficit. Enhancement involves attempts by healthy individuals to increase particular aspects of their functioning beyond the norm for that person. But here again we have problems. How do we define healthy? How do we measure healthy? Is it just simply a matter of perception? Is it a matter of societal expectations? Is health absence of disease? Or is it complete physical, mental and social well-being? The aim of medicine has traditionally been curing the sick, bringing the level of functioning back to the norm, however that is defined. But increasingly healthcare is much broader than this, and perceptions of clinical need have changed. What is an appropriate role for the National Health Service in this? Is it simply to cure the sick? Should it improve public health and prevent sickness? Or should it go further and include broader notions of social welfare and improving quality of life amongst its aims? So treatment enhancement is an issue, a real issue. And then the third one that I put down is, move straight on to the slide that says tech there, is transhumanism. This is basically the underlying philosophy that is driving those who are really pushing for these technologies. Transhumanism, simply defined, I put that on the slide, using technology to build a perfect people on a perfect earth, freed from our physical limitations. They want to see the transformation of the human race into something post-human or better than human. Kevin Warwick, a classical transhumanist. I was born human, but this was an accident of fate, a condition merely of time and place. I believe it is something we have the power to change. And this quote from Designer Evolution, which is the second from last slide on page 6, is very interesting in reflecting the view that transhumanists have of the human body. Humanity is a disease from which to be cured. What is the human condition but an affliction? What is a human being? A weak mind in a decaying body, a bundle of primitive emotions and a brief life and the knowledge of inevitable death. Let us learn to think beyond the human condition, not what humanity is, but what it could be. And Nigel Cameron talks about transhuman. He says, and this is where we have to try and achieve the balance here. Insofar as transhumanism is a campaign for embracing technologies that can deepen and enhance or extend the human experience, I'm all for it. A kind of hyperhumanism, as it were. But insofar as it's an effort to pull us out of the human matrix, that's the glory of the classical world and the Renaissance and Enlightenment, it subverts the human and sets up an abstract geekery in its place. So we used to be, and Leon Kass, Beyond Therapy, which is the government's, the US government, he headed up the Presidential Commission for the President's Council on Bioethics in the States. And they did this, an important book really actually called Beyond Therapy, looking at a lot of these issues and enhancement therapies and technologies. And he warns that in wanting to become more than we are, and in sometimes acting as if we were already superhuman or divine, we risk despising what we are and neglecting what we have. In other words, we risk despising our own current humanity. Okay. Right, I'm going to very quickly, because I've only got a couple, I can't remember exactly when I started, but I know it's late now, just very quickly some religious perspectives on this. And I can't spend too long on it, obviously, because I've run out of time. Does the Bible have anything to say on this? The key thing that the Bible does say, I believe, is the creation of man in God's image, and the fact that this gives great value to human life. And I believe most Christians do believe that our essential humanness and humanity and consequent human nature and dignity stems from our creation in the image of God. And human dignity, to define it, which came up briefly in the talk last night, is the recognition that all human persons are worthy of esteem and respect. Every human possesses dignity. It cannot be gained through doing or having some specific quality or ability, but is gained by simply being human. It's innate to humans. So although we can acknowledge damage to creation, to our creation from sin and the fall, but at the same time we don't align ourselves with transhumanists who believe that the body is dispensable and almost an object of loathing. It's very much opposite. A Christian's view of mankind is opposite to that of the transhumanists who have this self-loathing of the human body. Man in God's image is described as being very good. And humans also obviously are set apart from the rest of the creation. Now the next slide you'll see, just exploring human dignity a little bit further. I've put human dignity, I put Factor X under there because Francis Fukuyama in our Post-Human Future, is a really interesting book, he refers to, he's as someone who's not a Christian or religious, tries to define human dignity in his own way, and he calls it Factor X, and he comes up with a very similar sort of definition almost of what Christians would regard human dignity as being, although he does call it Factor X, which is why I put that under there. But really human dignity is all about being an image bearer of God and being in a relationship with God. And the last bullet point I put on there is simply to say it's not a list of various attributes such as reason, intelligence, creativity or language. And the questions really is, if we tamper with our personality and individually, is there a risk we may lose our sense of who we are? And if there is a risk, does that matter? Do we want to have a society in which human intelligence is another commodity, so people come to see their bodies as mechanisms to be improved, even when they function normally? And the purpose of human life is not to transform human flesh into data that can be improved through technological manipulation or engineering, but to understand we're saved in response to a divine gift and initiative. And the work of man, but I'll move on to technology. Okay, humans, just to briefly mention, humans are given dominion and told to subdue the earth because they're made in God's image. Again, this importance of God's image. This implies we're to reflect the character of the Creator in the way we carry out our commands. Now, it is good, and this is what I like almost about these issues, it's good to have technological development that will help us to heal and do good. And a lot of these technologies are doing really fantastic stuff at the frontiers of science, and I think there's a lot of really exciting things out there. We remain under the obligation to be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Knowledge is considered a gift of God to alleviate suffering. The quest for technology is part of our God-given nature. Technology will be with us. We have an ethical requirement to reach out and heal the sick, to make every effort to help the sick and handicapped to have a fuller experience of being human. In other words, we have to use technology. But at the same time, as Francis Collins was saying, we have to take responsibility for making sure it's used for good purposes. We're accountable, and we shouldn't exploit the authority that we've given. So in other words, we have to somehow work to do God's work in God's way. And I put a slide there of technology is very much founded on Christian beliefs. The world is susceptible to change, we can change it, and we have a moral duty to change it, but that is not unrestricted. You'll see that with Babel, the problem with Babel, it almost illustrates the fact that some of God's gifts of knowledge, technology and dominion have been, in the past, were abused and are potentially being abused today with the desire to ignore God in the use of technology. I haven't got time to explore the similarities between transhuman and Christianity. There are some similarities in them, but there are also some crucial differences. And someone called Brent Waters, who's written From Human to Post-Human, Christian Theology and Technology in a Postmodern World, he simply says here, what is at stake in the battle between these two religions, as he calls transhumanism almost as a religion, in our emerging postmodern world, is how a genuinely human and humane future should be crafted. And that really is very much, I think, our challenge for us. Transhumanists believe that humans can save themselves through their own work of transformation. However, that is incompatible with a biblical view of humanity where only Christ can save and transform. And that's why I put that slide up. Why did Jesus heal but not enhance? Jesus healed but only what was lost by sickness, illness and the effects of sin. He didn't make people more intelligent, stronger and taller, nor encourage them to pursue immortality on this world. And the last few verses, the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Man's problem is a corrupt heart and will. This is what God sees. Dealing with difficult issues very quickly. John Wyatt has a very helpful way of dealing with difficult issues. He uses the ethics of art restoration. He says that as Christians, how do we analyse controversial biotechnological advances? If we see our bodies as wonderful original masterpieces reflecting the design and image of God, but marred by biological and moral flaws, what's our responsibility to this masterpiece? What do we do with it? Ethical intervention seeks to protect, maintain and restore to the original design, operating within the parameters that the artist fixed. Unethical restoration is that which seeks to enhance, alter or attempt to improve on that original design in some way. And that can perhaps help us a bit with the problem of whether we restore our bodies or enhance them. And C.S. Lewis, I won't read those out, but two really useful quotes from C.S. Lewis to show that actually, yes, there's lots of really great stuff ahead, lots of really good advances potentially in the future, but it comes with a warning of what is the cost of some of those advances. And every victory, besides being the general who triumphs, we could also be the prisoner who follows the triumphal car. And my last quote from BMA, there are two issues on which there seem to be little disagreement. The first of these is the development and use of some forms of enhancements, cognitive and technological harms, are inevitable. This is going to happen. The second issue, no disagreement, that now is the time to begin to consider this issue and to decide, as a society, how we should proceed. The Bible gives us resources to define the limits of what's acceptable. The challenge, as Brent Waters says, is how to work towards a human and a humane future. And that's it. I'm very sorry about the overrun.
Thank you very much, Philippa, and to Rodney for reproductions. So I think we will spend a few minutes in questions, not many, and then we'll have a break and delay the start next week slightly. So yes.
Mine's really more of a comment than a question, and that is that this desire to improve the human condition, even in improve human nature itself, is precisely the driving force behind the interest of the liberal theologians of the early 20th century and liberal religious scientists in eugenics. It's precisely the point, exactly, no different at all. So it's, that's the same. The transhumanism is exactly the issue. They did not believe in original sin, and they did not believe in the innate, however one translates that, if you want to put it in simple terms, the basic sinful tendencies of every human being. And they thought that they could remove sexual promiscuity, exploitation of workers, undemocratic systems of government. All of that could possibly be accomplished through eugenics. And they thought that was the working out of the kingdom of God on earth.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's the same philosophies, just different technologies.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Simon.
Quite often you hear a lot of this technology stuff, artificial intelligence, whatever, hyped up by the physicists and computer scientists, whereas the cynical biologist will sit in the room and say we can't even get a projector to talk to a computer. How are these things going to happen? How much do you think an awful lot of this area is sort of overhyped by people who stand to gain through their research by getting these things out in the public area? Because some of the things you said here about the disabled people being able to communicate with a computer, I seem to recall that actual experiment. It was a cursor that was moving across the screen, and using their brain they could slow it down. That was the full extent of it. And yet in the press it's people can control machines. Do you think it's overhyped by the more physicists?
Well, I mean, who knows to a certain extent. I mean, I think things like cranial stem cell research is kind of hyped as well, as was sort of hinted at by John yesterday. Yes, I mean, yes, a lot of it. And the other thing about that cursor business and the implant, there are thousands and thousands of dollars to do for one person. I mean, they're hugely expensive. So it is very much a minority of people that can do it. But what this stuff is doing is that's kind of driving the outer reaches of this stuff for a minority and for sort of purely research purposes. But actually, once that starts, it's the stuff that follows behind, I think, over time, and it's the changing of people's minds, and it's the continued investment into areas that are less challenging, but actually can make differences in the future. I mean, I'm not being very clear, but something, for instance, like DARPA, the US Defence Agency's research project, they put hundreds of thousands of pounds, and Joel Garrett talks about this a lot, into all sorts of different areas of research, much of which will never see the light of day. But one or two things have, and I think they claim to have sort of been very key, instrumental into sort of the World Wide Web and the setting up of that. I can't remember exactly what they claim, but they claim one or two key advances. So although a lot of research has not got anywhere, one or two pieces of research have and have profoundly changed things. So they're pouring lots of money in the hope that one or two things will come out that will actually really profoundly change things. And I think with all of this stuff, I think it's, I mean, I'm not predicting completely. I'm showing sort of where the outer reaches of research are and what might be possible. And not all of it will happen, but even if a small part happens, even if mindsets are changed so that people are more accepting of these kinds of technologies like minefields or whatever, then I think we just need to be aware of what could happen on the horizon. And therefore, if we're a little bit more aware, we can start thinking about, well what do I think about it? And what do we as Christians think about it? And what do we ask for regulation now? Do we ask for sort of committees to be set up now in advance of these things happening? And I think that's what's so interesting about this DMA paper. You know, this is not everyone. It might be university professors might be using mind pills and university students, so it's not widespread use. But the fact that the BMA is talking about this now shows that they are thinking that actually some of this could be reality in the future, and it's not happening now. But when it happens, we need to be ready. Or if it happens, we need to be ready. The cybernetics stuff is slightly more extreme, but it's all part of the same sort of package with the mind pills as well, which are not as expensive and isolated really in use.
Was there a question? Yes.
This is a related question. My question is how far the technological advancement can go, because you have referred to ICT, and according to Moore's law, the size of the silicon chips, that will be at the point of diminishing return, and after 2030, the size cannot be reduced. So after 2030, there would be no advancement with regard to information and communication technologies. So there is a point technological advancement will have to be stopped. And this relates to increased fear of technological advancement. So he was referring technological heights and others. So at one point we will have to stop. So what's your idea of this?
I haven't heard that view, actually. That's interesting, because what I have read is people, I mean, I have heard about the Moore's law, obviously, that's really important. That's about a curve of accelerated returns, so the speed of development of complex computing, in effect. But others, like Joel Garrow and Ray Kurzweil and others, are very much talking about accelerating returns and it not being sort of stopped in the future. So they talk almost about the opposite of that. And they're saying, actually I won't go into what they say because some of it is pretty extreme, but one of the things that Kurzweil predicts, he says, he's talking in 2029, he's talking about huge advances in technological development. No division between human and machine world. Implants, defining what a human will be difficult legal and political issue. People have implants in their eyes and ears, continual communication with the web. Most people will use devices aimed at the disabled. It will be hard to sell if someone's physically handicapped. Life expectancy will be 120 years. Most disease will be prevented or reversed. 50-year-olds will look like 35-year-olds. Those are the kind of predictions that others are saying about the future. Now that is one person's view, and you may be completely correct in the other view. I don't know. I can't predict. I mean, I think you have two completely opposite views. It may be that in 2035, technological advance will have halted and they won't be able to go any further with computers, chips and stuff. Or it may be that actually it will just continue and continue, like Kurzweil and the other transhumanists claiming.
Karen.
It seems to me, as you look back, that we are extremely bad at predicting the future. I mean, we think some great development's going to happen. It doesn't happen. Something rather different happens. I mean, I am highly skeptical of a lot of these people. I mean, they are hugely speculative, and they're sure they have a particular worldview generally. And I just wonder how seriously one really should actually take some of the predictions. And I know, you put in, your own, concerns about some of it. But I mean, even when one gives the examples of college students taking some of these drugs, I mean, college students are of an age where they're the risk takers, probably because of where the frontal lobe of their brain's developing. And I mean, all sort of college students, late teens, early teens, are risk takers. And I just wonder to what extent you can actually take a group like that and say they're going to be typical of the population as a whole. That's just a little example. So, I mean, I think, though, in general, how seriously should we take some of this hyper-speculation?
There is, I mean, very fair, which is why, in the talk, I've constantly referred to the BMA, who think that's a serious issue. I did a slide of David King, was it the Chief Scientific Advisor, going to the Cabinet, talking about it. I've mentioned this. DMOS is a very well-respected think tank, looking at this several years ago and getting a lot of people to talk about this, and this I've seen quoted around, which is why I've used people like Joel Garrow and Ray Kurzweil, who are the transhumanists, but I've also mentioned people like Susan Greenfield, who is highly respected, as highly respected from the stop. And her challenges, are we about to see the changing of human nature? So yes, I completely agree. A lot of these people like Kevin Warwick, Aubrey de Grey, Ray Kurzweil, whatever, are extreme transhumanists. But what I think they're doing is they have a platform that's changing people's mindset. Kevin Warwick is doing research that on one hand is extremely good for implants, and he's doing some really good stuff with Parkinson's, but he's using that as a platform to do his other work that is changing people's minds and is at the outer edges of research. And he may never see the light of day with any of that stuff, but he's using the good stuff to sort of as his platform. So those are extreme people, but there are enough people like Susan Greenfield around who are seriously questioning, hang on, what is going on here? So I think, yes, I think to a certain extent we don't know how much of it will happen, which is why this is very much looking ahead. But I think the fact that so many people like Susan Greenfield, the BMA, the Chief Scientific Officer, and others, and fairly regular articles in the Times as well from well-respected journalists, must make us start to think, well, hang on, there is something happening here, and if it does happen, are we going to be slightly more prepared? Oh, Francis Fukuyama is the other one as well. Of course, he's a great advocate for regulation of these issues, and he again has started to raise a lot of these issues as being ones that we need to start thinking about now. So it's a fine balance between trying to sort of not ignore those who are driving the philosophy behind it and the extremists, as well as listening to those who do have I think we can
The
listen to.
challenge for all of us is how do we distinguish between some of this stuff which is going on in highly skeptical, suspicious, direct interpretation, and how then do we actually see what are the serious developments which we actually should promote. I mean, you mentioned the sort of robotic arms. Well, obviously robotic arms are used in some surgery now.
Yeah.
Extremely useful.
Yeah.
But some of the other stuff, perhaps.
Yeah.
But how does one actually, what criteria do you use for distinguishing the two? That to me is the challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I completely agree. If you got any comments on that? Yeah, I mean, this is throwing out the issues, really. Yeah, absolutely. What are the issues? Yeah.